Today I'd like to talk about PPFs, or production possibility frontiers, one of the most common and often misunderstood aspects of introductory economics. A production possibility frontier is a line which shows combinations of two goods that a country can produce, assuming a given amount of resources, assuming a given amount of technology, and also adherence to a legal system. This is a classic PPF shape. You can see this is concave to the origin, sloping down but with a changing gradient. This country can produce tuna and salmon, and if it specialises in the production of tuna, i.e. produces no salmon, it can produce 100 units of tuna. Moving its resources away from tuna and into salmon allows it to produce different quantities of salmon, up to a maximum of 100. But you'll notice that the gradient here changes, and this is because resources are suited more to one product than to another. So for example, as we move from complete specialisation, 100 tuna and 0 salmon, to the first 10 units of salmon, you can see that the sacrifice in terms of tuna foregone is extremely small, perhaps 1 or 2 units of tuna. As we move increasingly away from tuna, we put more and more resources into salmon, and those resources get less and less productive relative to tuna. If we consider this point, at this point the country is producing 35 units of tuna and 90 units of salmon. Now, to produce these extra 10 units, it must of course sacrifice tuna. But whereas with the first 10 units, the opportunity cost, the sacrifice of those units was almost no tuna, these final 10 units of salmon can be produced but at a cost of 35 units of tuna. Thus we see an increasing opportunity cost as we produce more of one good. And the most common reason for this, for these diminishing returns as we say, is because resources are better suited to one product than to another. In the case of tuna and salmon, it's likely that your fishing grounds are both suited to tuna and to salmon, and so if you are just producing tuna, you are using some resources, freshwater streams for example, to produce tuna which are extremely poor for doing so. Thus, when we produce our first salmon, we lose almost no tuna. As we use more and more of our fishing grounds just to produce salmon, eventually we must take away from those resources which are particularly good for producing tuna and which yield few salmon, relatively speaking. Thus we can see a concave to the origin, increasing opportunity cost. In this PPF, which you will notice that I've used for international trade, we see that the opportunity cost of a unit of tuna is constant at 2 units of bread. The assumption which is different in this case is simply that the resources are equally useful in each product, and thus there is no extra sacrifice required when we produce more bread, irrelevant in terms of how much tuna we're producing. The sacrifice will always be 1 loss of tuna for 2 units of bread. Notice that both PPFs slope down. They slope down because scarce resources have alternative uses. The gradients, however, are different because of the assumptions about the suitability of the factors of production for the two products. In this case, certain resources are more suited to one product than another, and in this case, resources are equally suited to each product.